Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Dave Bambry, and I serve as the Vice President for Alumni and Student Engagement at your University of Illinois Alumni Association. I first want to thank everyone for joining us this evening as we are looking forward to another great session of our ongoing Alumni College Speaker Series. Before I introduce our speaker this evening, I want to take just a moment to talk about some amazing things happening at the Alumni Association. In the last 6 months, the association has relaunched its paid membership model with some great new benefits. We are very excited to bring this to our alumni, and I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to check it out at uiaa.org/membership for details about what all is included and to sign up. Some of these expanded benefits include a partnership with the Krannert Center for the Performing Arts that will feature 2 member-only virtual performances each year, a chance to engage in career coaching, and discounts at the university bookstore, to name a few. For those of you on the call who may be life members of the association, you are in an absolutely great spot, as you will be able to access these benefits today at no additional cost. We are certainly grateful for the investment you made in your life membership, and we want to honor that with our current suite of benefits. While we have introduced this paid membership model for those interested in our expanded benefits and offerings, we are still planning to have a lot of ways to engage at no cost. For example, our speaker series this evening will continue to be for all alumni, and other initiatives like our online networking and mentorship platform, Leicht, will also continue as a no-cost benefit. If you haven't already checked out Alumni, please do so by visiting alumnilink.illinois.edu. We have a large number of alumni and students who have already signed up, and it is a great way to interact with those folks. In addition, homecoming is just a few short weeks away, taking place from October 9th through the 15th. There are a ton of great ways and events to engage with throughout the week, so be sure to check out that schedule at homecoming.illinois.edu. It would be great to have you back on campus for that. Lastly, before I introduce our speaker this evening, I always like to remind everyone to please feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We have left time at the end for questions, and we'll do our very best to get to as many as possible. But let's get to why we are here this evening, and that is to hear from another wonderful faculty member, and it is my pleasure to introduce him this evening. Dr. Kevin Leicht is professor of the Sociology Department at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and former chair of the Department of Sociology and director of the Iowa Social Science Research Center at the University of Iowa, and past program officer for the Sociology and Resource Implementations for Data Intensive Research Program at the National Science Foundation. He has written extensively on issues related to economic development, globalization, and political sociology. His work has been funded by the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, Spencer Foundation, and the Ford Foundation, and his published articles have appeared in numerous outlets. His current research examines the consequences of cultural fragmentation and social media misinformation on cultural and political life. With that, it is my great pleasure to turn the program over to Dr. Kevin Leicht.
Thanks for coming out. This is an evening presentation, and I'm going to talk about how healthy the American middle class is. And my guess is after I'm done speaking, or while I'm speaking, you will be driven to drink. So please go right ahead. As this is not the rosiest presentation you've probably ever heard. So how did I become interested in this topic in the first place? We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the middle class patient in the exam room. We'll talk about what has happened here and how possibly this can be fixed. It's certainly a topic that's received a lot of press attention, and a topic that's received a fair amount of attention from social scientists as well. But how did I get interested in this topic? So in 1978, a very naive college student who was a sophomore at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska, walks into the lobby of the Omaha National Bank, and then all hell breaks loose. No, I did not rob the bank. I wasn't wearing a mask made out of pantyhose. Instead, I said, I would like to apply for a credit card. Yes. The teller, who was laughing, said, "We don't give credit cards to college students," and gave me this look like, "Who are you kidding?" But the student persisted. So the student said, I would really like to apply for a credit card. So I get thrown in with the banker who says, son, what kind of fool you take us for anyway? We don't give credit cards to college students. Puffing away. Then the student basically says, is there any way I can do this? And the banker says, yes, but your parents need to co-sign for the card. So I said, and I'm from a single parent home. My father died when I was in 3rd grade. So my mother raised me to adulthood. So the student says, great, I'll bring my mother down here. And Will, and the banker interrupts and says, that's no good, son. Only your father will do. And he's puffing away. So I got a credit card finally that had a $100 limit. So fast forward to 2008, 2009. I'm teaching political sociology at the University of Iowa, and there's the very nice picture of the old Capitol on the University of Iowa campus. And I have 70 students in the political sociology class, none of whom have a full-time job, and I asked them to keep track of how much credit they're offered through the mail. The answer over the course of a 15-week semester is $450,000. And I start to think, boy, that is really bizarre, really bizarre. So what I'm going to talk about today comes from 2 books that I've written. An earlier book in the mid-2000s titled Post-Industrial Peasants, The Illusion of Middle-Class Prosperity, and a book that's just come out in its 3rd edition, Middle Class Meltdown in America, Causes, Consequences, and Remedies. So before we go any further, we need to talk a little bit about who the middle class actually is. And in this book and in most of my research, I'm usually talking about people whose income is around the median of the income distribution, which this year would be $87,222. So 50% of the population, 50% of the families make more than that, 50% make less. The middle class's main income source is from earnings from a job, so they don't make very much money from either rents or investments, and their main source of wealth is an owner-occupied home. It is this group, broadly speaking, that in my research has had a lot of trouble over the last 30 to 35 years or so. And the basic argument I make from my research and that the gap between stagnant incomes and their consumer aspirations has been filled by easily available credit. This credit magically appeared at precisely the time that middle class incomes were stagnating. So all of a sudden, you got credit card offers through the mail. You could lease cars rather than buy them. You could buy cars with no money down. You could buy houses with no money down. You could buy appliances with no money down. Everybody was financing everything. It's amazing how this showed up right when incomes went flat. And the use of debt as an instrument for supporting consumption looks a lot like debt peonage and serfdom from agrarian economies, or what I refer to as post-industrial peasanthood. Very real productivity gains in the 80s and 90s were taken by others, and the deregulation of consumer credit markets produced a socialization of credit risk through asset-backed securities and collateralized debt obligations, which are kind of technical to talk about, but I could get into that more if you wanted me to. And there are also political consequences of this middle-class instability. There are real declines in reciprocity and community and civility. There are a lot of people out there who are desperate and don't want to give anybody anything. And what I've argued over the years is we could do better than this. So what's worse, I think, and something with a little bit more of a cultural message, is we've deprived people of a narrative for describing their lives and a narrative for how to get ahead. And this is easily seen if we compare the old rules and the new rules of the economic game. So let's do that now. So this is from a 2008 op-ed piece that was published in the Des Moines Register on Mother's Day of all things. So in this piece, I sort of talked about how this narrative was destroyed, and I'd start with mom said, and she would say something you were supposed to do, and then we would look at what's actually happening now, and they weren't really quite the same. So let's look at the new rules and the old rules for the middle class game. So the old rules were find a good, steady job. Yes, and stick with it. So now good jobs are hard to come by and often don't last very long. Mom said companies reward loyal, hardworking people with pay raises and promotions. These days, there aren't too many rewards for loyalty. Mom said get married and settle down someplace. You'll get a lot of benefits from being married. These days, economic uncertainty undermines marriage fairly seriously. Mom says, buy a home as soon as you can and pay off the mortgage. But buying a house and keeping it seems to be rather difficult. Mom also said over the kitchen table, save money for a rainy day. But most people are living paycheck to paycheck. Mom says if you stick with the same company, you'll get to retire in the 1960s, in your 60s, with a retirement plan financed by a company pension. Retirement now either doesn't happen at all or it's postponed. Mom said all types of worthy or inherently worth something are dignified and worthy of respect. Now, these days, it kind of seems like workers are suckers and the rich are glamorous. And remember, son, your kid can attend the local state university and receive a good education for a modest cost, and a good job will follow. Well, college these days seems more like a lottery ticket that's paid for with student loans. And oh, by the way, it would help if your first college roommate is the next Bill Gates. So there are a lot of shifting sands there that I've talked about in different venues. But the final piece of new advice is choose your parents wisely. There's been a serious decline in social mobility where people are not changing social classes very much. So the social resources your parents have to devote to you have a lot to do with where you actually end up, more so than in the 60s and the 70s. So choose your parents wisely. There's other evidence the middle class has not been doing very good, has done slightly better recently, but still not all that great. So real median income, real median before tax family income has been pretty flat from 1979 until well into the 2010s, and has only really recovered to its prior levels in the last few years. So that has meant that the purchasing power of the middle class simply hasn't increased as a result of earnings from a job. Corporate CEOs have certainly cashed in. So the ratio of what average workers make to what corporate CEOs make in the United States is the highest in the world, and is the highest in the world by several orders of magnitude. There is no systematic research by business school professors or anyone else that can explain this phenomena very convincingly. There was some change in that after the 2008-2009 recession, but it's heading right back up to where it once was, which is somewhere between 300 and 400 to 1. So that gap is widening yet again. The US savings rate historically from 1970 until now has been going downward. In 2000, from 2003 to 2009, it was actually in the net negative, which means people were spending more money, chronically spending more money than they were making as a nation, which is really amazing. But it's still been, the long-term trend has been downward. So savings is still not systematically happening. Far fewer workers have guaranteed pension benefits when they retire, and many more are in defined contribution retirement plans. So if you happen to work for the University of Illinois or for the Illinois state government, you still have a pension. A lot of state workers have a pension. There are very few private sector pensions left. And there's also a hidden crisis in retirement savings. So these are median retirement account balances by race and ethnicity. And you'll notice that the top of the top number on the y-axis there is only $90,000. So the The median amount of money that's in a 401k nationally is around $40,000. There's a substantial percentage of the population that saved in effect nothing. So they've saved nothing here, and they've saved nothing for retirement here. So, and it seems as if the inequalities there are getting bigger almost by the day. But of course, just when we can't afford to grow old as a society and we can't afford old people, we just apply the magic dust and presto, we don't age. Why, age is just a number. 60 is the new 30. You're only as old as you feel. There's a great book about this by Susan Jacoby, who was a former columnist with the New York Times, titled Never Say Die, where she documents how we decided aging didn't happen at precisely the time we couldn't afford to grow old. And you can certainly see this happening in a lot of cultural venues. We've also, to a substantial extent, replaced borrowing with earning. So we have decided as a nation somehow that we can make up for the money we don't earn by easily available credit, and that credit for a substantial part of the last 35 years has been extremely easy to get, especially relative to what it once was. And the extreme examples of that happened before the 2009 financial collapse, where getting a mortgage in many parts of the country was very easy. They had something called a fog the mirror mortgage. So if you can fog a mirror, you get the mortgage, don't have to prove income or anything like that. So mortgages were extremely easy to get. In some parts of California, you could get a fog the mirror mortgage and never make payments on the mortgage. By the time the mortgage company caught up with you, which would be 6 to 8 months later, you could sell the house at a profit and then turn around and do the whole thing again. So borrowing has, in many respects, replaced earning. It's also true, as I said, that productivity gains have been taken by others and have not necessarily been redistributed to workers. So this is a simulation that would show you what workers' pay would be if it actually went up with the productivity gains that workers have produced. And as of 2006, the average hourly wage would be at least $5 an hour higher. At this point in 2020, it'd be more like $20 an hour higher. So productivity has increased substantially, but that money is not accrued to average workers. And of course, there's been quite a growth in income inequality as a result of all of these changes. So this is a graph of the ratio of the income share that goes to the middle fifth of the distribution, right where the middle class live, to the top fifth of the distribution, the people in the top 20%. And what this graph basically shows is more and more income is going to the top 20% and less is going to the middle. And chances are, by the way, if you're an upper middle class professional, you're probably in this top 20% and you've benefited from this. I certainly have. So I'm not accusing anybody of anything here. It's just this is something that has definitely happened. Corporate profits have risen almost without ceasing for this entire period and show no real signs of abating. You see a little bit of a blip in 2007, 2009, a little bit right after 1996, but corporate profits continue to rise. And this will be another record year for corporate profits this year as well. But what's really interesting is if you look over time, you can see serious changes in the accumulation of what we call net worth. So this is a graph that shows what median net worth is and then what mean net worth is. So the median net worth separates the top 50% of the wealth distribution from the bottom. The mean net worth is an arithmetic average of everyone's net worth. Because the average or the mean takes in extreme values, if the mean is going up a lot and the median isn't changing, then there's a lot of money being added to the top of the distribution and not so much at the bottom or the middle. And this is precisely what you see here. So the mean of the wealth distribution is getting higher. The median is pretty much stuck at the same level. You'll notice there's a big drop in the median, which is the blue bar from 2007 to 2010. In the years from 2007 to 2010, median net worth dropped by half, which means the person that was the median in the wealth distribution lost half of what they had, which is quite a big drop, and they didn't have that much to begin with. So not only are top incomes separating from everyone else, but the top of the wealth distribution is as well. You can also tell that consumers are borrowing more money. So there's increasing uses of credit card debt and increasing amounts of non-revolving debt as well. So mortgages in particular and auto loans. So, and these have been rising steadily since the early 70s. But what's really amazing is not only have these things sort of happened in the market economy, but there have been changes in how government has worked as well. And one of those is changes in where tax revenues come from. And this is something that the Center for Tax Policy has talked about a bit. Brookings Institution has talked about this. Even the American Enterprise Institute has talked about it. So we've shifted the composition of where the federal government gets its tax money from toward individual income taxes and payroll taxes and away from corporate taxes. So corporate tax rates have dropped. Individual tax rates have remained the same or increased. And payroll taxes now make up a substantial portion of what the federal government collects. So there have been big changes there. So then there have also been some cultural changes that have happened as well. You know, we've created in many professions a very small elite of very privileged practitioners that gain a disproportionate share of the rewards. In fact, in a lot of professions, law is one of them, medicine is another one. The college professoriate's starting to turn into a profession like this, where there's more economic inequality among the people that have the credential than there is between the people who have the credential and the rest of the economy. So increasingly knowing someone is a lawyer or a doctor tells you a little bit about their economic status, but not nearly as much as it would have in the 60s or the 70s. So increasingly you have to know what specialty they're in, where they practice, and where they get their patients from. We've also decided that financialization and systematic and that financialization and investment income is where things are at, and we've systematically disinvested in earnings from work as the primary engine driving economic growth and prosperity. So we've decided to tax investments at a different rate. We've decided to tax earnings at higher rates than investment, and we've sort of valorized that. We've made that a big deal. And we've emphasized that this financialization is the route to prosperity. So in many business school classes, at least until recent years, everyone wanted to go into finance. Nobody wanted to go into anything else because you can make the most money in finance. All of this is happening while middle class earnings are flat, and there are rising costs on big ticket items that the middle class relies on, that we'll talk about in a minute or two here. So, and of course, there's been a systematic shift in government tax and spending policies toward the wealthy and corporations. So large tax cuts, deficit financing, and all that goes with that. And that's been a long-term trend. So for Mr. and Mrs. Average, there's very little in the way of tax relief. And there's serious inflation on traditional big ticket items. So homes in good neighborhoods, prices have gone up a lot. What constitutes a good neighborhood? A neighborhood with the neighborhood attached to a good school system. So if you're competing for a home in a good neighborhood, what do you do now? You take two incomes, a husband and a wife's income, or two partners' income, to compete for that house. You get the house because it's a place for good schools for your children. Then what happens? Well, one of you loses a job. What happens after that? The parents do absolutely anything to keep the house. Anything. They cash out their retirement plan. They start putting house payments on credit cards, which is a very seriously bad idea. They borrow money from relatives, anything to keep their children in this good school district. They get in serious financial trouble. They end up declaring bankruptcy. State-supported college educations have gotten more expensive. The money the states used to provide is now being replaced by tuition and fees. And a lot of that is supported by student loans. Even employer-provided health insurance is getting expensive. Increasingly, when I ask people, does your employer provide health insurance, I have to ask people if they take it, because the premiums keep going up. And a lot of families can't afford them. So affordable childcare in many places is non-existent. So the average layout is now around $1,100 a month per child. I remember doing this some years ago with two children, and my wife asked me, how are we going to afford college? I basically said, we're paying for it now. If you looked at what our layout was, it was about what it would have cost to send the kids to college then. The defined pension is dying out, as being replaced by 401ks and other contribution-based plans. And in 32% of those plans, you can only invest in your own company's stock. So this is basically Enron all over again. And of course, just when you think this whole thing, it doesn't get any weirder, it actually does. So in our book, we talk about the politics of displacement. What is the politics of displacement? While all of this is going on, we're going to fight about anything but money, and literally anything will do. So as one of my unnamed relatives once said, why isn't it obvious why this is happening? The immigrants have done it to us. They've moved in and they've screwed everything up. Or how about this one? The transgender kids have rigged the job market, the stock market. Heard that one too. Or how about this politics of displacement? So constituents are in Senator Wingnutt's office and say they want to talk about schools, gas prices, health costs, jobs, and taxes. And Senator Wingnut says, my constituents are united in demanding a constitutional amendment to ban flag burning. Of course. Or how about this survey question and this actual answer? Did you know Obama's not an American citizen? And someone responded, will it lower my mortgage payment? So, and of course, there are different versions or narratives about explaining inequality that won't exactly do. And so some of my research talks about the myth that most social inequality is driven by race and gender. It's not. There's more economic inequality among races and among genders than there is between them, and that's gotten worse, and the gaps between them have gotten better. Or social inequality could be fixed if people just got more education. Very, very dubious. We don't exactly know why education leads to more income, believe it or not. You would think social science would know that, but we actually don't. The only thing we know is people who have education seem to make more money than people that don't have more education, but we don't know why. So simply saying people should have more education is not going to fix that problem. Or if we make elite positions more diverse, then everyone else will follow. There will be this magic lift-up elevator that lifts everyone else up. There is no lift-up elevator. The net result of all of this is no good, both culturally and economically. So my wages are flat, I blame economists. My taxes are high, I blame lawyers. I can't afford healthcare, I blame doctors. I can't afford legal help, I blame lawyers again. And my kid can't afford college, so I blame college professors. So it's time to say I don't need experts. And there have been numerous analyses of what happens when experts aren't trusted anymore. So, And of course, I tie some of this to some other things that are going on culturally that have led to more fragmentation, which I talk about in my social media research. So did you know, and I was told this directly to my face by another relative, that the Democrats have a cure for cancer? It's hidden in the basement of the White House. They don't want it to get out. Why? Because then doctors won't be employed anymore. So did you know that malaria vaccines cause infertility in women? That the world is really 6,000 years old and climate change is a hoax? That Obama is not an American citizen. Michelle Obama is really a man, and therefore Obama is gay. And that only 6 people in Chicago died of COVID. Another one of my relatives told me this. Yeah. Very interesting. So what's to be done about this? Well, there are a couple of things. I've got 2 or 3 minutes left, and then we'll turn things over to you. First thing we have to say is that when there's no narrative for getting ahead, and people are in fact not getting ahead, people fill those gaps with rumors. So not having a narrative for getting ahead that works invites the type of cultural fragmentation that we see. The second thing we have to reassert, and the book talks about this, is that family values cost money, and that good jobs at good wages fix many things. Parents that are chronically unemployed, can't stay employed, and can't keep a steady income have a very difficult time creating the basis for a sound marriage or for sound child rearing. It's just as simple as that. So family values cost money. A third idea my co-author and I talk about is if you're going to make a killing in the American capital market, you should have to take other people with you. This is actually a Warren Buffett idea. So Warren Buffett once sat in front of the House of Representatives and said, my company employs 75 people and is worth $50 billion. You should be trying to soak me. I'm not even paying people that are stimulating the economy. And you're treating me like I'm royalty or something. This isn't what you want. And then the final thing we probably need to do is re-regulate credit investment arguments at least a little tiny bit. And then there are some other things we need. The one thing I've noticed among our students, and I'm sure you've probably noticed among young people as well, is there needs to be some more broad-based financial literacy education. So there are a lot of ways to get ahead in the world now, and there are a lot of opportunities. There are also a lot of ways to really dig yourself in a hole, and no one's going to stop you. So there needs more financial literacy education, starting in high school and continuing in college. One way to make wealth inequality sting a little bit less is to have individual investment accounts. So people, when they're born, would be given an individual investment account worth a few $1,000s, and it would be allowed to build up until when they're 21, they could access that and do something with it. There's a huge difference in life between having a little capital to draw from and having none. And this is an idea that's popular on both sides of the political aisle. We need some form of universal insurance. We're getting closer to that. And we need to fix the school to work transition so there are more apprenticeships. We probably need to get employers out of the private health insurance business. And if families matter to us, there needs to be concrete monetary public policies to support them, and we're starting to see some. So thank you for listening. I think I've taken up enough of your time. That's right at 35 minutes. So, and I welcome your questions. Thank you.
Dr. Leicht, thank you so much for the presentation. Yeah, it was a ton packed into a very short time. You mentioned only about 30 minutes here, but we've got, I think about 25, 30 minutes for some questions here. We've got some great ones already, but I will encourage folks to continue to submit. Like I mentioned in the chat, we'll get to as many as possible before our time is up here, but let's jump right in and get to some questions here. So we had a question come in from Randy. Randy, thanks for joining us this evening. He says that personal finance is a very important topic that he believes should be taught at both the high school level and required for college freshmen as well. Dr. Leicht, do you share in that analysis of of that becoming more standardized nationally in the future of high school and college education?
Oh, wholeheartedly, yes. So our financial system now, there are a lot of good opportunities, but there are a lot of really just bad ones too. And so you simply can't probably predict or accept that parents are going to know exactly what's going on out there and systematically teach their children those things, although you learn a lot about finance from your parents. But yes, I think it ought to be required in high school and in college for sure. I totally agree.
Great, thank you. Kind of staying on that educational front here with another question. With the increased cost of college education, we hear a lot about that and the perceived success of what we're calling the gig economy, so kind of not needing that education. Do you see higher education as losing its value at all as we move forward here?
Oh, that's a good question as well. So I always point out when someone asks that question, there are two sides to there are two sides to value in that equation. So there's what jobs are, and there's what education does. So if the labor market has changed in a series of ways that make it so college doesn't pay, why do people simply point at college and say, college doesn't pay anymore? It's like, wait a minute, why isn't the labor market rewarding people better than it is? So there are two sides to that. I do think, though, and this is probably more point directly to the question, higher education's value may change a little bit. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think we may have oversold the idea that college was for everybody. And there's still a lot of people that drop out of college without degrees and end up either in debt or end up with no credential. So I think we will have to change, and we'll have to have more routes for gaining employment and gaining post-secondary education than university, for sure.
Thank you. So we've heard a lot about this idea of the Great Resignation, obviously throughout the pandemic, and as we get back to more normal times, we've heard a lot about that topic. Do you see this? You talked about kind of that corporate profit model and CEO salaries. Do you see the Great Resignation as bringing any leverage back to that low and middle income employees as we move forward, or do you think this all just level sets down the road and it gets back to the old way again?
I'm somewhat hopeful we'll see some changes as a result of that. I think one of the things that happened in the pandemic, and this happened to a lot of people, not totally to people that are at the middle or near the bottom of the income distribution, sort of reassessed what their values were in relationship to work and money. So do I really want to work 60 to 80 hours a week all of my life and have no time to have any fun or to have any fulfilling experiences? Do I really want to take whatever the job market offers and be in debt up to my ears and not have any control over my life? And so I think the Great Resignation is a recognition of that. And I hope it leads to some more reconfiguring of employment relationships so that they improve. And I think it could very well do that. And I'm hopeful for that.
Dr. Leicht, we've had a couple questions on this topic, so I'm going to try to synthesize them as best as possible. But a couple questions on universal basic income or UBI, and just wanting your thoughts on that. Do you see that as a way to really bring the lower and middle classes forward, or does that just elevate the upper class even further?
I think universal basic income has some value to it. And there have been several proposals over the years to create what would in effect be a universal basic income. If you look at the earned income tax credit, for example, it's somewhat complex to use, but is a form of universal basic income. And Richard Nixon's proposal to create what was in effect a negative income tax was basically a universal basic income. There are a lot of people who agree that there should be a universal basic income from a wide variety of political positions, and what they argue over is what the minimum income should be, but not necessarily whether there should be one or not. So I think this is an idea whose time might eventually come. And I don't know if it'll be all that life transforming. It will be life transforming for people near the bottom of the distribution for sure, the people who are really desperate. And that's probably who it's intended mostly to help. So I think you're going to see more effort there, and some of it's going to come from really surprising quarters, I think.
Thank you. Again, a couple different questions on this, so I'll do my best to bring them together. But essentially, if you have a magic wand, you've talked about some things politically that could potentially change and help with these ways, or with these ideas. If you had a magic wand, would there be one or two policies that you would implement to really shift what's happening here?
Oh boy.
How much time do we have, right?
Good question. There are a number of things here there are a lot of things here that are broken a little bit, and some things that are really broken. The first thing I would do is I would tax investment income and earned income at the same rates. And I'm not exactly sure what those rates would be, but the conservative movements in the rest of the industrialized world think our capital gain system is crazy. They really do. They think people should decide whether to be paid through capital gains or earnings from work on the basis of the merits of those choices, not because of the tax benefits they accrue. So that would be one thing I would change. The second thing I would change, if I could really wave my magic wand and do something pretty radical, is bring back antitrust enforcement. So antitrust enforcement for the last quite a while, under both Democratic and Republican administrations, has been completely asleep at the wheel. So we have these very large monopolies or quasi-monopolies that control a lot of the stuff we see and a lot of the things we're able to do and afford. And if we actually had vigorous antitrust enforcement, that would help quite a lot. The last thing I would do is I would change our tax system so it rewarded corporations based on the number of people they employed and paid well. So if you make $1 jillion and you employ 200,000 people and you pay them really well and they all have health benefits and retirement benefits, your tax rate is very low. If you make the same amount of money and you employ almost no one and you engage in nothing but financial manipulations to make your money, your tax rate is very high. So you would be taxed on the basis of how many people you bring along with you rather than something else.
Thank you. We've also had a couple questions about labor unions. Those were obviously something developed to give some power to the workers. Do you see those coming back in a bigger way, and do you see that as a benefit for the worker if those do come back in a big way again?
I see them coming back somewhat. I mean, you can see them. You can definitely see in service industries there are now Starbucks locations that are unionized. There are Amazon warehouses that are looking to unionize. There are still surveys that show that a large swath of American workers would join a union if one were available, and there's not one available. So there's one thing that's handicaps unions in the United States that's got to change, and this is going to have to be something that's a little more systemic. Unionization in the United States is tied to specific workplaces at specific physical locations. If the physical location disappears, your union contract goes poof. So back when all the NLRB rules were invented, there was a big investment in a factory, and there were thousands of people that worked there, and the thing had to produce a product, and a lot of products for a long time, or the person who owned the factory wasn't going to make any money. And there were no alternatives to that. So one way or another, they had to get along. They may not like each other, but they had to get along. Now, physical workplaces can move very, very quickly. And often without even selling the old workplace, you can simply set up production somewhere else. And at that point, your union negotiations are stopped. So I think unions will make a comeback, but it's going to be hard for them to make really, really big inroads.
Thank you. You talked about, or I guess I shouldn't say you talked about, is there a relationship between age and wealth? Do people who start in the middle class stay in the middle class as they get older, or are we seeing movement up or down? And has that shifted over time? Is there more movement or less movement now than we've ever seen before?
There is less movement, somewhat less movement upward and somewhat more movement downward. But what there really is a lot of kind of stagnation, I guess I would call it. So it's still a person who's raised in the middle class home still has a halfway decent chance of moving upward in the class distribution, but they now also have a halfway decent chance of moving downward in that distribution too. So so the total amount of mobility has actually gone down quite a bit. So people tend to be staying in the social classes they're born into. There's quite a bit of evidence that in the OECD, which is basically the league of the wealthiest nations in the world, our upward social mobility rate is now lower than anywhere else, which is really strange. Because we tend to think of ourselves as the Horatio Alger country, where you can come here and you can start with nothing, and then you're going to retire and you're going to be a jillionaire. And that does happen sometimes. So it's not like it never happens, but it's not a typical story.
So kind of sticking with that global topic here, what other countries are you seeing that have a healthier middle class, and what is in place for those countries that isn't here? How are they gaining the health of the middle class more than we are?
Well, it's interesting because there are several models. So the middle class are healthier in say Germany and the Nordic countries than they are here. They're healthier in France than they are here. And those countries go about doing what they do in slightly different ways. But basically what most of those countries do is they take a worker and they extensively support their lives. So to give you an example, I take a train in the Oslo train station, Oslo, Norway, middle of the night, nothing is open. The only thing that's open is a Burger King. All right. So I get on the Burger King and I order the Whopper meal, #1. And in Oslo, Norway, 5 years ago, it was almost $20. Why? The worker behind the counter is a full-time worker that has a full set of benefits, has a full retirement plan, and makes a decent wage. So many of those countries simply don't allow the creation of bad jobs, except under very special circumstances. And They have subsidized family leave. In Germany, you get a family allowance. So for every child you have that's under 18 years old, the government sends you a check every month. It's not a very large check, but it's a check. So what most of those countries do is they have this safety net that practically anyone, almost everyone has access to, but it means a lot more for the people in the middle of the distribution at the bottom than it does for the people at the top.
Do you think that's something that would work in the United States? I mean, is that with the span of wealth that we already have and how things are set up here? Is that a concept that you think could be brought to the U.S.?
Well, it's interesting because you're seeing more discussions. You're seeing more discussions from a wide variety of different people about not only guaranteed minimum incomes, but also family allowances. So President Biden has talked about family allowances. Elizabeth Warren has talked about family allowances, but also Mitt Romney has talked about family allowances. Marco Rubio has talked about family allowances. So, and these would be cash grants that you would get because you have children that are under 18 years old. And you would get your check automatically every month. And for upper class people, it wouldn't amount to anything. So you'd probably just stick the money in an account somewhere. But if you're lower middle class person or below, that's serious dough there. And so you can wait and take a better job, or you can support yourself between jobs. You can look for a better job. You can take some time off and take some college classes or something like that. So you're starting to hear discussions like that from a wide variety of people here, which I think is a good thing.
Absolutely. We've gotten a few questions on this as well. You mentioned during your presentation that it would be good to get employers out of the health insurance business. Could you go into a little more depth with that, and what would replace that, if I can talk here in the 55th minute of our presentation?
Yes. Well, basically, I think 41% of all employers in the United States have employer-provided health insurance, and almost all of them complain about the same thing: the cost of it. It costs them more money every year. It costs the employees more money every year. The amount goes up faster than the rate of inflation. And if that continues, we're going to get to the point where no employer in their right mind will provide this as a fringe benefit. And we're going to have something that replaces that. And we actually probably need a healthcare system. We need some sort of public national health insurance system that is not dependent on employment at all. And so a lot of employers, I think, secretly at least, so you go to the cigar bar and you drink scotch, right? And they say, I really want out of the health insurance business. I'd really rather we had national health insurance. I would pay my taxes and be done with it. But you can see a situation where if employers keep opting out of providing health insurance, eventually so few employers will be providing health insurance, everyone else will have to be doing something else. And so we're going to have to create some system for that to work. And we don't really have one right now.
So we've got time for maybe one or two more here. I think I'll pose this one, and again, we may have time for one more after this, but I think this may be a good one to end on as well. Are you optimistic about the economic future of our country, or is this doom and gloom that we're predicting moving forward? And maybe just spend a couple minutes talking about your thoughts around that.
Good question. I think the economic future of our country is definitely an open question. The single thing the single thing I always tell my students that keeps the economic condition of our country better than you would think it otherwise is the dollar is the world's reserve currency. So there's money just flowing into the United States all the time. The world's wealthy by dollars. They invest in dollars. They buy our treasury bills. They buy our other forms of government securities and debt. If that ever changed, we are in serious trouble, really serious trouble. I don't think there's any chance it'll change very soon. But I see a lot of optimistic trends. I mean, average wages are starting to go up a little bit. The people that are opting out of the labor market or asking for better conditions are starting to get them. So that's a good thing. We've decided that corporations probably ought to pay a minimum tax. Not necessarily a bad thing. So there are changes that make me optimistic, but it's certainly not a done deal for sure.
Dr. Leicht, thank you so much. We are approaching the hour, and although I'm sure we could go for another hour on this same topic, we do want to be respectful of everybody's schedule this evening, and so we'll leave it there. I will thank you again for a wonderful presentation. This just means that we'll have to have you back at some point because there's so much more to talk about, and I'm sure it will continue to evolve as we move forward here. But thank you all for joining us this evening for another session of our speaker series, our Alumni College. Please keep an eye out for future sessions. We've got a great schedule coming this fall, and we will certainly email you those opportunities as we move forward. And certainly feel free to reach out to us if we can do anything for you at the Alumni Association. And please, like I mentioned at the open, if you can join us for homecoming, it's certainly one of our favorite weeks of the year. So we look forward to having you back in Champaign-Urbana or engaging virtually with us. But thank you again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at a future session. Have a great evening.